Hello, hello. Welcome back to Final Album February, the final episode of Final Album February. And today we are taking a look at Genesis's final album from 1997, Calling All Stations. Now, some people might say that this isn't a Genesis album. I think it is. I really do. I think it's a Genesis album, and I do think it's a good album. But before I get into that, we got to go over some history. So, Genesis started out in the 70s as a prog band, obviously with Peter Gabriel. But in 1975, Peter Gabriel would leave upon the conclusion of the Lamb Lies Down on Broadway tour, leaving Phil Collins to take over the vocals. In 1977, Steve Hackett would leave after the completion of the Wind and Wuthering tour. And both times, Genesis saw more album sales and more success. And from 1978 up until 1992, Genesis just got bigger and bigger and bigger in popularity. It's like some people would say it peaked in '86. I think, but it really didn't. If you just look at basic album sales, maybe in terms of gig attendance, it didn't. But their 1991 album, We Can't Dance, sold more than their previous album, Invisible Touch. So it was huge. Like, they were huge at the time. And obviously, Phil Collins was a massive star on his own, had his own solo career. Mike Rutherford had a pretty good career outside of Genesis with Mike and the Mechanics. It really only left Tony Banks with not a whole lot of notable success outside of Genesis, even though he did have, a couple of solo albums, the first of which came out in 78, I want to say, or 79. So, a pretty, very, a lot of talent in this band, I will say. A lot of it didn't get utilized to the best of its ability in the 80s, but, some good talent. In 1996, Phil Collins decided to leave Genesis because he wanted to focus on his solo career. He kind of felt a little bit tied down. He made some comment about there were certain types of songs that he was tired of singing, and he came out with, I was going to say No Jacket Required, but he came out with one, in 95, where he, played all the instruments, wrote all the songs just on his own, and, I haven't listened to it, so, anyway, so, what do you, now, Mike Rutherford and Tony Banks, they looked at that and said, okay, well, we're going to carry on as Genesis, because they'd done it twice before. They'd done it when Anthony Phillips had left in 1970. They did it when Peter Gabriel left in 1975. They did it when Steve Hackett left in 1977, right? So, I do see why they thought that this would be successful, because previous examples had shown that this would be successful. And they, held auditions for many, many, many singers, and they eventually landed on this Scottish fella, a young Scottish fella, not even 30 at the time. I believe he was 28 years old at the time this album was recorded and released, and they did the tour. But it was this Scottish fella from a grunge band or post-grunge band, one of those from the 90s, one of those types of 90s bands. You know what I'm talking about. Not to sound like I'm 77 years old. But it was a Scottish fella by the name of Ray Wilson. And I think he was a very good pick. And he came in and he recorded the vocals. The former touring drummer Chester Thompson asked to be made a member, and this guy had toured with them since 1977. He had toured with them for 20 years, and for some inexplicable reason, Mike and Tony decided, no, you're not going to be a member, you're not drumming in the studio. I don't know why. I really don't know why. I don't know if it was a personality thing. I don't know if they didn't think he would, mesh well in the studio, even though that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense because he had, nailed all the drum parts, especially with Phil Collins, for the last 20 years. So I don't know. I really don't know why they didn't do that. And so on the drums, they got this fella. It's Nir, like his stage name is Nir Z. The Z is short for something Middle Eastern. I just like I know what it is. I just can't figure out how to pronounce it. It's Zianahu. It's not. That's not it. But the guy's name was Nir Z, and he does a fantastic job as well as Ray Wilson. And the album was released in September of '97. The tour began in '98. They tried to book a U.S. tour twice. Both times it was canceled due to poor ticket sales. So it didn't, again, it wasn't, great. Like the success, like the thought that, oh, we'll just become even bigger without Phil Collins, that didn't pan out. But now, once we've gotten all that background out of the way, I'm sure this is where, if you are still with me, thank you very much. We are get into the album. Song number 1, Calling All Stations, the title track of the album. It's like it has a striking, kind of lo-fi sound with the guitar. It's almost like a 1997 version of, like, in terms of the tone, it just kind of, it's like a 1997 version of 21st Century Schizoid Man by King Crimson in terms of the fidelity. It's really cool. It's a really, really cool riff. I almost prefer this studio version to the live versions that they would do later, because I feel like this is a much rawer sound. Like, I don't, it has genuinely great lyrics. Like I said, Ray Wilson was a great choice. This is a great opener to this album. My only problem with it is the drums. It's kind of like the same thing for the 5.5 odd minutes that this song is. And it's, it's not bad. It does fit. I just think if Phil was in, he would have done something a little bit more interesting. But, it was cool. Like, even Chester Thompson would have done something a little bit more interesting. Again, baffling decision on their part. Not shitting on Nir Z at all, just like it's weird. Why are you having two outsiders come in? Anyway, now the second song, Congo, the intro might be one of the best on the album. It sounds, and then the song itself sounds a lot like contemporary songs of the time, not in a bad way. It definitely sounds like the 90s, but it's a part of the 90s that has aged well, in my opinion. Not that the 90s have aged well. I think they've aged better than the 80s. But, that might just because I'm sick and tired of nostalgia for the 80s. And it's got a very nice bridge and a cool drum fill to boot. So, again, Congo, great song. Title track, great song. We come to Shipwrecked. It has a Wish You Were Here-esque intro, like the song Wish You Were Here, not Shine On You Crazy Diamond. Where, it's, flipping through radio stations, and then you find the riff of this song, and then it, kind of, explodes into the regular song a little bit. It's arguably more relevant today than it was at the time. It's a great song. It's talking about, Mike Rutherford explained it as, it kind of talks about that feeling where you can be on the city corner surrounded by many, many people and feel completely alone. And that's only, kind of gotten worse with the age of the internet, the loneliness epidemic, COVID. So this song has lyrically aged really, really well. Musically, it's aged worse than Congo, but it's still not a bad song. I don't I automatically know it's the 90s, but I listen to most of the songs I listen to, and I automatically know it's from the 70s, mostly from, the fact that they were allowed to be creative. But anyway, Shipwrecked is a great song. So far, 3 out of 3 greatness. We come to Alien Afternoon, which is another great song with some problems. It has the proggiest intro on a Genesis song since Duke, from 1980, 17 years earlier. Very vivid lyrics. It paints a picture in your mind. Now there is one problem with it, and that at a couple moments in the song, you have these really out of place 80s horn synths. I don't know why Tony Banks made that decision. That's one of the bad Banksisms on this album. There's some very good Banksisms on this album as well. There's a super cool section about halfway through, followed by some really good Banksisms, and a spiffy guitar riff, and then it's got a super proggy second half, and that's really where the Banksisms come alive. So, very, very good song, really. I could argue that this song represents the album, because it is 8 minutes long. It's a little bit long. It's a little bit longer than it needs to be, much like the album. The album's an hour and 7 minutes long, for God's sake. So it's a little longer than it needs to be. Kind of has some iffy moments, but overall, it's a very pleasant experience. It's a good representation of the album. Not About Us. This is one of 3 songs with Ray Wilson credited with songwriting credits. There's a slight hint of organ in the chorus, and the lyrics are also relevant. Kind of talks about communication. One of the lyrics is it's not about us, it's about the anger that we feel. And boy, if that hasn't aged well, that's what has. Right? Because, that feeling, I feel, has only increased in this age of social media and, bullshit that really doesn't matter. People getting polarized over fucking franchises. Why? Just enjoy your old stuff. Anyway, unrelated. But, it's a really good song. Again, really good song. If that's what you need, the intro doesn't instill a whole lot of confidence, but once, that part of the song's over, it's a very good song. It's definitely a love song, but it genuinely does have its own identity. It is 5 minutes long. From here on out, everything's over 5 minutes long. It's a bit long for what it is, and it is the worst example of premature fade out on this album. That's something that a lot of people complain about. The title track does it too. Congo kind of does it a little bit, where, the song will start fading out while there's lyrics you haven't heard before still going. If this happened once or twice, I would say, oh, it's just a production fuck up. But no, it's very clearly an intentional choice. It happens later on. I don't know why. I don't know why they made that choice. One of, several choices that do hurt this album. I'm not going to act like this album is perfect. It is hurt by that stuff. But yeah, if that's what you need, pretty good. Pretty good. Now we get to the second best song on the album, the dividing line. It almost sounds like the Division Bell a little bit. This album and that album kind of have, a similar motif going. They're both, over an hour long. They're both, pretty much the final album that this band did. That each band did, and they both kind of talk about communication quite frequently, and that's pretty apparent in the Dividing Line. It's got a very Banks-centric intro, very cool guitar tone. It's nice and proggy. Wilson kills it on the vocals, and Near Z is doing a phenomenal Phil Collins impression, and he even gets a drum solo in the middle of the song, and the song is it's like 7.5 minutes long, and it doesn't feel it. It's a great song. Second best song on the album after the title track, which, the title track's the first song. But, this song is proof that this album really does not blow its load too early. It's very good. Very good. And then, Uncertain Weather, we're kind of back to eh. It does suffer from Banksisms. These are some of the bad Banksisms. Weirdly has one of the coolest bridges on the album. And then it has a proper use of fade out. It doesn't fade out before, the song's over. And actually, The Dividing Line, I think, is the only song on the album not to use fade out at all. It has a natural end point. So it's very good. The Dividing Line is. Uncertain Weather, it's alright. Small Talk, it's got bad 80s horn synths. This is the only true stinker on the album. This is the only song on the album that I would outright call bad, instead of just, part of it being bad. It also has, Wilson credited as a writer, and this song might have worked in Stiltskin. It might have worked with a different sound, a bit of a different musical sensibility, a bit of a different melody, but here it really doesn't. It really suffers. It's not good. And it's too damn long. It's like 5.5 minutes long. It doesn't need to be that long. And then, here we are. Song number 10, There Must Be Some Other Way. Once again, credits Wilson as a writer. It's got a nice groove. Once again, a hint of organ. Once again, has lyrics about communication. It's got one cool keyboard solo with a really stupid one in the middle of it for some reason. Even though it's one solo, but it feels like a second crappier one got inserted into the middle. Even though, it's weird to describe. When you listen to it, you'll understand what I'm talking about. It's a bit long, but, it's alright. It's the second longest song on the album. Once again, it is, 8 minutes long. But it's pretty good. It's pretty good. And then we come to the final song, the longest song on the album, One Man's Fool. Starts like something off of Invisible Touch. The first half would sound great. The first half of this song would sound great if you de-80sified it. This song feels like a leftover from We Can't Dance a little bit, or, Invisible Touch. Specifically, it reminded me of Tonight, 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 the way it starts. It's got like this weird drum machine, like a bad synth sound. We've got one more hint of organ. Again, I love an organ sound. I think this album would be improved if they used organ a little more. Go back a little bit more proggy. That's another thing people say. This album doesn't really commit to a musical direction. It does. It's just a very strange one. The middle section sounds like Mario 64. It's like a 30-second bit that kind of sounds like it's music from Mario 64. And then the second half is almost an entirely different song. It's like a genuinely nice experience. And then the last 2 minutes of this album are really, really, really fun. And that's going to end it. Go listen to it. I'm serious. Go give it a listen. Give this album a chance. I know some people might say that this album isn't very good, but if you actually sit down and listen to it, I think you will come to admit that this is a Genesis album. It's a different kind of Genesis album, right? Genesis, the version of Genesis that made Duke is not the same Genesis that made Trick of the Tail, or Invisible Touch, or Selling England by the Pound. And this isn't the same, version of Genesis that made, Abacab, or The Self-Titled, or We Can't Dance, or Duke. It's, it is, a different version of Genesis. You know, it's very strange to me how some people vehemently do not like this album. The band would tour in Europe. It would be modestly successful, but after the conclusion of that, Mike and Tony basically went, "Yeah, it's about time to hang it up." I think if this album had been marketed better, right? If the record company put its full weight behind it on the promotional circuit, it would have done a lot better than it did. I really think it would have done a lot better. And I think we could have got a second, even better album. Do I necessarily think that we would have seen that Genesis would have seen the height of success that they saw with their whole 80s repertoire? No, but I do think it would have been a very, very interesting version of Genesis. I do find this album to be very interesting. If there's one thing I will say about this album, is that it does have a musical identity. It's a weird one, but it does have a musical identity. I hear something from this album and I immediately know it's from this album. I hear something from 80s Genesis, even though I know what songs are on what, if you catch me on an off day, I can't tell those songs apart, but I know instantly when I hear one of these songs that this is, Calling All Stations Genesis, and I do think it's great. Ray Wilson would be let go from Genesis by 2000. I think that's a little bit unfortunate. And in 2007, 10 years after this album came out, there would be the Genesis reunion tour, and then about 15 years after that, there would be the Last Domino tour. None of those obviously featured Ray Wilson. The only Genesis member Ray Wilson has performed with in subsequent years is Steve Hackett, a member of Genesis that he did not interact with while making this album, and I think it's a shame. I think this version of Genesis had a good, a good 2 or 3 more albums in it. I think it would have been nice. But that's going to do it for me. If you've enjoyed this video, please leave a like on it. If you have something to add, please feel free to do so in the comment section down below. If you want to continue along this musical journey with me, please feel free to subscribe. If you want to hear me talk about something other than music, I have a podcast with 2 of my buddies. It's called Dorkies. I will leave a link to the most recent episode of that in the description down below. And if you want to hear what I happen to be listening to that day, you can follow me on Instagram. I will also link that down below. And with that, I would like to thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you all in the next in my next video, which will be the first episode of Talkin' Tunes, even though it's it's going to be the same video style as everything else I've done. But yeah, for now, I'd like to thank you all very much for watching and remind you to stay weird and keep jamming.